All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is it, our first guest on John Goldstein's regular show. This is an old friend of mine. His name is Jubi Arriola-Headley. He happens to be an up-and-coming poet. He has an exciting new book coming out of his poetry called Original Kink that's due out this October. So let me introduce to you Mr. Jubi Arriola-Headley. Hi, Jubi.
Hey, John. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Sure, my pleasure. This is exciting. This is so you are officially my first interviewee.
And you are officially also my first interview. I'm using you as practice for when the New York Times calls.
That's fine by me. I hope they get tomorrow. Yeah. So this is our first time, so we can we'll take it slow.
Gentle.
So we can talk a little bit, but I wouldn't mind if you're up for it, getting right into hearing some of your poetry. I happened to hear you at a reading a couple of weeks ago, and I really was very impressed with what you've been doing and just how clear it was that you are figuring out life and figuring out yourself and wanting to openly share that with the world. A lot of people call themselves poets, and a lot of people write a lot of poetry. And,
no comments.
There's a line from Mame, thanks the show Anti-Mame. How bleak was my puberty? Yeah, so that's so unfortunately poetry gets a bad rap sometimes simply because there are plenty of bad poets out there. You were one of them. So if you're open to it, why don't I'm going to switch to giving you the camera and giving you the floor, and why don't you share one of your poems right now?
Okay.
Right.
Lately, I've been interested in readings and starting with what is the first poem in the book, Original Kink, coming out this October from Sibling Rivalry Press. And one of the reasons is because, as one other poet that read it said to me, it's kind of the thesis statement of the entire collection. And this poem is called Peacocking. You a boy, right? It's this silly game I play with myself, scavenging for scraps of conversation out of context, like peacocks in the Arctic or tenderness expressed in baritone. And here in this department store, like every other, I'd found it, a single word, sharp and swift to Fisher. Boy. Perhaps the boy had stared too long at the man behind the cosmetics counter. Gothic arches penciled in where eyebrows once grew. Perhaps the boy had lingered, longing, lusting, fingered the fabric of some skirt or blouse, as the man I can't imagine is his father dragged him through the misses section. This boy, broken, his stride, his spirit. While some woman I can only imagine the boy called mother guided her gaze toward anywhere but this moment. She's long seeded hope for something soft in the boy. I wish I didn't know the rest of his story, how butterflies won't so much settle in a boy's belly as slit their own throats for fear of flamboyance, how a boy must fashion his fists into ciphers for touch, how quick we are to teach a boy to cradle his hurt in his hands and preen.
Wow. So there's something I didn't mention before you started that I don't know if it came through in your poetry, and I don't know if the audience members will have figured it out. But it's that you're Black, and
They might not have noticed. I do live in South Florida. There are people who tan better than this.
oh no, it wasn't that.
Oh, that's not what you meant?
But yeah, that you're gay, and that that was I heard this poem before when at your last reading, and that was the piece. Some of the stuff you were talking about, the discoveries that the things you were not permitted to enjoy, that you truly wanted to enjoy, and some of that comes from being gay. But I know for myself, like, I love butterflies, and I love all kinds of things that are considered beautiful or artsy or whatever, or especially in our time period growing up, because we're in the same age group. Things that were called gay. Don't do that. You're going to be gay. And personally, I just wanting to escape that, wanting to like not be trapped by some kind of ideal of society that has nothing to do with me or my true self, or what I love in life. But for you, and is it okay if we talk about this? Like,
absolutely.
Do you remember coming out? Do you remember what it was like when you knew that what you were, and that you were willing to be open? I guess that there's stages of it, because you come out once, you come out to people individually over time, and then eventually you just are like, well, whatever. The world is going to know this, and they're going to love me or not. I really don't care anymore. Can you share any of that with us?
It's been a journey. I know now, retroactively, having done the work internally to write this book, that probably I first fell in love with somebody I identified as another boy at 5 years old. And I wrote a poem about it, and it's called Puppy Love, actually. I don't know this boy from a can of paint. He appeared once in my life that I can remember, and I've never found him again. But I was at a barbecue at my own house, and this boy was there, and I fell and scraped my knee down to the white meat underneath, and I was terrified, and I was screaming. And this boy, maybe 8 or 9 or 10, came over and put his arm around his shoulder and put his head on my chest and comforted me. And that was like a revolution in my mind. I fell in love with that boy then and there. He was as God to me at that moment. And so that's probably the first indication I had, but I didn't have words for what that was called yet. When I hit puberty, I assume what happened for everyone happened for me. I started having dreams about and noticing boys where other people notice girls. And by then I had language for it. And the language I had made it very clear to me that this was not something to share or discuss. So I spent a lot of high school wrestling with this, being very quiet about it, finding ways to connect with other men in the ways that we did in the 80s, when there weren't things like gay straight alliances or social media or the internet, and there's some poems in the book about that too. I didn't come out actually until I went to college, Vassar, where we both went. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a college guide back when we went to college by Lisa Bernbach. And in this book, she wrote that Vassar was a very common destination for gay men. And I literally applied to Vassar based on that. I said, if that's true, I will go there and I will come out and I will finally get to be me. And I applied, and thank God I got in. I don't know what I would have done or how my life would have changed if I didn't. So I went, and it took me about 6 months to work up the courage to go to the LGBT meeting in the Rose Room, I think. And it took me a few more months to work up the courage. And on Thanksgiving, my sophomore year, I went home and told my mama and my sisters that I was bisexual because I thought that would soften the blow. Yeah. And they didn't have the reaction, but as I see it now, they didn't have the worst reaction either. So I counted it as a win. And after that, I always thought, and I always said to myself, once my family knows, if they haven't rejected me, I can live. So it's been a process ever since, growing into my actual self.
Sure.
And I feel like finally approaching the 6th decade of life that I'm comfortable in a way that I haven't been in the previous 5 decades.
You know, when I went to, I visited Vassar with my sister, and I had a similar experience, you know, where she said to me, "Oh yeah, this place probably has lots of deadheads there." And I'm going to Vassar.
This is home, my Mecca.
But and you said so in high school you found other avenues like you said high school wrestling. I think
no.
I know. I'm just
Yeah.
said high school wrestling, or I just wanted to get that in there because I think a lot of guys went that route too. But that's a whole other.
There was a wrestler who I can't name because we're Facebook friends now, and he's a real person that exists. But I had the hugest crush on him. And I tried not to let it show when he was within 10 feet of me. And I don't think I did a good job, so it probably won't shock him to find that out. But yeah, I spent a lot of time out of school, skipping school because I didn't feel like I fit in at school, and meeting guys at the gay bookstore or less appropriate places to meet guys. I snuck into a couple of bars and a couple of other places. But that's in the 80s. I'm not sure how else people did it. And, you know, I'll go back and do some research, but that's what we had.
Yes, and it was just plain secretive because you couldn't do it publicly without feeling scorn or shame. And I'd imagine some of that is what makes up original kink.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned that that poem "Puppy Love." I don't know if you have it handy, if that's something you'd like to share, but you know, based on the story you just described, that sounds like that would be a nice one to hear.
I can. I'm going to have to put on my glasses to share it because I have it in small print. And one of the things that happens when one gets older is evidently one's eyes start working less well than they used to. So apologies in advance for this.
Not at all.
I'm going to hold the book real close to my head or put on my glasses.
You need them. Go for it.
Okay.
A great quote. A friend of mine, her name is Suzanne. She shared with me on my birthday, on my 50th birthday, that you know, your 40s are the old age of youth, but your 50s are the youth of old age. So this is our time. This is our time to enjoy this stuff. And yeah, okay, you need some glasses to share some deep words. I think there's no harm in that. I'd so much rather you have glasses for quality poetry than no glasses for wreck, you know. So go for it. It's called Puppy Love.
It's called Puppy Love.
Great.
First time you fell in love, you wasn't a minute more than 5 years old. Don't you let them grown folks tell you different. You was in love. Grown folks will say, what a little boy know about in love? But you loved him like them church ladies in their pressed red skirt suits and jute and feather crowns love to gossip. Like they like to say they love Jesus. Here's how you loved him. You couldn't think of him without a capital H. He was 10. You think. You can't remember. Skip that. Tell him what's true. His eyes was like this particular brown you get when daddy pour his bourbon and the light catch it just so. Or maybe like puppies, that's the thing. Soft and full of scrappy and new. Here's what you know. Them pools of dew, they drowned you. Drowned you. That day you ran and tripped and fell and skinned your thigh clear down to the raw meat of you. You screamed. And how did he know how to mother you? How was his arm strong enough to lift you off the ground? How did he know to work his hands to wipe your tears? How do you know to lay your head on his chest? Wrap your arms around his waist? Imagine this moment a sacrament. How'd he know to let you? From time to time, you wonder where this boy might be and who. You hope he's known a happy like the happy he gave you. You wonder if he thinks of you ever, late at night, lying next to the one who ain't the one who got away. His first love. If only you knew his name.
Wow. So I muted myself for those, but there's line after line in there that I was just going, oh, that like.
Thank you.
Wrenching and beautiful, and your writing is really nice, but you also deliver really well. So congratulations, you really are finding some very cool stuff and very interesting stuff. I'm so happy for you, and I'm so glad we reconnected in this way. I want to ask, I want to put out a couple of other questions, but I'm a little like that. I'm a little bit blown away. That was really awesome. That's especially having heard the backstory prior to you sharing the poem. So my first question to you is, and this, if this is just like a stereotypical question, I'm sorry, but I'm new at this. It's my first time. Do you feel something very different, perhaps being a person of color coming out to the world as opposed to being part of the privileged white group of people who come out to the world?
I think that what I feel tends to reference an added layer of potential invisibility, if that makes any sense. It's not as if the larger community, and I think LGBT folks have made great strides in the past 50 years, but it's not as if we're at a place of comfort, of full acceptance yet. And I think there are ways in which being Black and LGBTQ plus or queer or whatever you call it adds a layer of challenge. But I also find strength in my difference. So being Black gives me a perspective that I couldn't have if I didn't. There's a book by Audre Lorde called Sister Outsider, and that very name indicates that coming from an external point of view, your gaze, your ability to critique and to see things for what they are is in some ways enhanced. And I think being gay adds a layer to that. Now, if you asked me this when I was 20 or 30 or even 40, I might have had a different answer. But now these are moments of celebration that I'm equipped with a set of qualities or beliefs or tools that allow me to see the world in a very expansive way, in a very embracing way, in a way that makes me vulnerable and hopefully gives me a greater capacity for empathy and for compassion. So I don't know if that at all approaches an answer to your question, but that's what it brought up for me.
Definitely. Great. And then I think this is probably my last question is,
okay.
Anything that you wish I knew as a privileged, straight, white male whose, biggest issue is that he was raised Jewish but has truly not suffered in many of the ways that I think a lot of other people have. Is there anything you wish you could tell me or want to ask of me? Or basically, I want to make this interview at least a little bit about me.
Of course. Why wouldn't you? Yes.
Wish you could bring to the table that you've never had the opportunity to before.
Well, I don't know if it's true that I've never had the opportunity or that I've never done it or that I just want to reach a different audience than normal. But we're in a moment where I think white folks are showing up in ways they haven't before. And there are so many things I want to say. And one of them is being an ally requires you not just to say, yes, listen to this person. It requires you to internalize the message and to talk about how it's impacted you, to sit with your own discomfort. I had this experience recently where a friend of mine posted on Facebook how hard it is to live with the literal bodily trauma of walking through the world in a body that looks like mine as a Black man, knowing that you are being literally policed, how exhausting that is, how draining that is, how that impacts you physically. And there were all these expressions by white folks of sympathy. I hate that you have to live that way. It's terrible. And yes, of course, I want you to feel that, white America, white world. But I posted and said, what would be impactful is if you went on your own page and talked about how heartbroken you are that you have a friend that has to go through this in the world, to people who look like you. And one person responded and said, yes, that's right, friend. Then he asked my friend to make his post public. And I thought, no, that's not what I just asked you. I don't need you to give him a platform for his words. That's absolutely useful, and there's a place for that. But you need to do the internal work also. You've got to say, I have a stake in this fight. My words have a place too. Not always, but when you are talking to your cohort, for lack of a better word, you need to be able to own your stuff. Talk about you. Talk about what's going on with you. Sit with the discomfort of being part of the majority who isn't seeing what we, whether that's Black folks or queer folks or trans folks or disabled folks, what we need you to see that you're not seeing. Speak yourself.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. This has been, I really did not know how this was going to go. And I feel like we did pretty well.
Thank you. I do too.
So I think this is a worthwhile time to sign off. And I'm just going to say this has been Jubi Arriola-Headley. He has an awesome new book coming out called Original Kink that's coming out this October. And Jubi, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And I hope that if, at the moment, I think I only have like one fan who watches this show, but I'm working on, doubling that by the end of the month. So
great.
If I get there and I get to a point where I can have people back again, I hope you'll consider coming back to do share some more poetry, or maybe even you and I can just catch up a little on what's going on in the world and how we're affecting change and stuff like that.
That would be wonderful. Ask fans to buy my book.
Ask fans to buy your book without question. I don't even think I need to ask them. I think anybody who just heard those poems is gonna be picking up a copy. And I don't know if you have an easy link or anything like that you can share, but if not, when you do, we'll add it into the content, into the comments on this video.
Okay. I love to live on Instagram, so I will direct people there. I think it's at Jubi, just Jubi. My first name, just Jubi. So Jubi, just Jubi. And please don't make me Twitter. Twitter, I hate.
You got it. And Jubi is with a J for people who don't.
Yes.
Jubi. Jubi, just Jubi. Awesome. Jubi, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, John, and likewise.
Great. All right. So that'll be officially where I cut this off.
Okay.
Yeah, that went great. I hope
Well, thank you.
I feel like we really nailed it. Um, you said great things. Those were really strong poems. Um, and yeah, how do you feel like that was all right?
Oh, I feel like it went great. Actually, that's the first time I read Puppy Love to an audience of anybody, whether it's 1 or 2 or 12. Sure. So, yeah, now I think I'm going to add that into the rotation. So thank you for that opportunity. I'm glad you asked about that because I was going to read the other one I read last time, but I'm glad I got to expose another poem. So
awesome. That's cool. And, so my hope, even as I put this together, one of the things I'm going to do is I'll share it on the Vassar alumni page. Okay. That's an opportunity for classmates to see it who might share it with other people. I do feel like the big picture with all of this, both from a business point of view, because I'd love to quit my day job and do this instead, as I'm sure you might also be interested in doing. Yes. But not just from a business point of view, but also from a what do you call it, like an evolutionary process, that this is the time. And even this crazy pandemic, it's affording, for me personally, it's affording me time I never had before to uplift. My hope is to uplift you, that you sell 1 million copies of this book.
Oh, well, thank you.
And if it helps me, and I get to do something fun that I'm enjoying, and I do actually love my job. I have a lot of fun there, and I get to do a lot of creative work. But ultimately, I'd be very happy doing something like this. So that it is my end game, not even about financial success, but about uplifting each other.
Cool.
Yeah. So this was awesome.
It was. Thank you. And I love that you are also on that same kind of journey where you're like, we're at an age now, and I really just want to be authentically me and locate some joy and see where that takes me. So it's kind of cool.
Thanks. And yeah, I know I had to do it in the way that worked for me.
Of course. Yeah.
I didn't go out in March. I didn't. There are so many things I didn't do. I did produce a show a couple of weeks ago that was before I took this full-time job. I'm there about 15 years, but I used to run an educational theater company. And
okay.
That because remember Liberty was my show that your friend.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But I had another show about Martin Luther King that I used to produce, and we used to take it to schools. And I really felt like I was changing the world. And I stopped doing that in 2008 and it had basically just been on a shelf the last several years. I kept trying to find ways to produce it again. And, my life was too busy and I just didn't have it in me. And then when the pandemic hit, and suddenly I started seeing ways of doing readings online, and I thought, wow, maybe this is a time to bring this back. But let's face it, the big one was George Floyd. And when that, that really was so clearly the straw that broke this country's back.
Yeah.
I thought this is something I can do. So I brought the script out, I pulled it out, looked at it, knew I needed to do some rewrites because things had changed a little, but not much. And I contacted the actors who did the show a decade ago. Every single one of them was so grateful that I had brought something back to them that was like, here's something we can do to bring it back to the world. I joke about this, but this president of ours, he may really have made America great again. He really may have been the best thing that ever happened to this country, in the sense that he has woken everybody up. That this ugliness needed to happen. The pandemic, the protests, this ugliness needed to come to light. We need this. It's the only way we're going to evolve past it. And a lot of people are suffering, but a lot of people are growing. And I feel like even with this stupid little show that maybe we're reshaping the world. And I'm so grateful you were willing to just show up and be part of that. Because this is
thank you. I'm grateful you were willing to have me. So I think this is literally how you do change. Sometimes it's tiny and it gets big. Sometimes it doesn't get big, but one-on-one counts too. Yep. So that's how I see it. So thank you.
Sure. It is. It's all baby steps.
Yeah, exactly.
And even some of, even though I said the goodbye, I may end up editing some of what we just spoke about back in.
Oh, yeah.
We'll see how it goes. I honestly feel like we had a rhythm going and had dialogue that was so smooth. I probably don't need to do any editing. And being a Gen Xer, I probably, if I can avoid it, I won't do any editing.
I think that's smart. Isn't that the way to live? I mean, minimal work.
Work smart, not hard.
I like it.
Smart, not hard.
Exactly. Truly.
All right. So honestly, unless you have anything you want to talk about, I think we did it.
No, I think it went great.